This past June, Anthropic released 2 brand new AI models, but just 3 days later, both of them were taken offline. This is the breakdown of exactly what happened. The models are Fable 5 and Mythos 5. Fable 5 is the public release, the model that you and I would be able to use. Compared to earlier AI models, it can reason through more complex problems, understand way larger software projects, and complete tasks that previously required experienced professionals. But its increased ability to analyze code and software created an entirely new problem. Traditionally, finding vulnerabilities is slow, difficult work. Frontier AI models, though, have started changing that. Instead of reading thousands of lines of code manually, now you can ask an AI to inspect the entire project, explain how different components work together, point out suspicious sections, and even suggest where vulnerabilities might exist. For companies trying to defend their systems, that saves days of work. The problem is that the same capability also helps someone looking for ways to attack those systems. Now, Anthropic understood all of that long before Fable 5, a model that's realistically capable of finding those vulnerabilities, was ever released, and they came up with a solution. Rather than giving every user unrestricted access to such a powerful model, the company created 2 different models. Fable 5 was meant to be the public-facing assistant, and when a conversation moved into particularly advanced work, Anthropic would route requests toward an older model with stricter limitations. Users would never notice the switch, and the chance that someone could use it irresponsibly would be avoided, or at least that's how it was supposed to work, but we'll get to that in just a minute. The second model took the opposite approach. It's called Claude Mythos 5. Unlike Fable, Mythos was not intended for everyday use. Anthropic limited it to a small testing program called Project Glasswing, where access was restricted to approved organizations, cybersecurity researchers, and major tech companies. The purpose of Mythos wasn't to answer everyday questions. It was to help professionals secure some of the world's most important software. Anthropic expected those organizations to use the model to audit large code bases, uncover difficult-to-find vulnerabilities, and strengthen their own systems before attackers can find those same weaknesses. In other words, Fable and Mythos aren't competing products. They are 2 parts of the same strategy. One model is designed for broad public use. The other is reserved for work that carries much greater risk. Now, for the first few days after launch, that approach appeared to be working. But it didn't take long before researchers started testing whether the boundary between those 2 models was as strong as Anthropic believed. Researchers began looking for ways around Fable's safeguards. This is something that happens whenever a major AI model is released. Companies like Anthropic or OpenAI train their models to refuse certain requests. Ask one to explain how to build ransomware or break into a company's network, and it should decline. So the job of security researchers is to test those limits. They're not trying to break into Anthropic servers. They test whether the model itself can be persuaded to ignore the rules it was trained to follow. When they succeed, it's commonly called a jailbreak. Despite the name, a jailbreak usually doesn't involve exploiting the software running the AI. Instead, it involves finding a sequence of prompts that causes the model to produce answers it was designed to withhold. According to Anthropic, researchers at Amazon found a way around that separation. By carefully structuring their prompts, they persuaded Fable 5 to perform many of the same tasks that were supposed to remain inside Project Glasswing. The model explained software, identified vulnerabilities, explained how those weaknesses could be exploited, and even generated proof of concept exploit code. For a security team, that's an extraordinarily useful capability. It can help uncover weaknesses before criminals find them. For an attacker, though, that same capability can dramatically shorten the path to discovering those weaknesses. Imagine discovering that the lock on your front door has a hidden flaw. Normally, finding that flaw requires an experienced locksmith working for hours. But imagine if you can just ask an AI to inspect the lock, explain exactly how it works, identify the weaknesses, and describe how someone could exploit it. Anthropic had spent months trying to keep that level of cyber capability inside a restricted restricted research program. The jailbreak, though, suggested that some of it had actually reached the public model. Anthropic later argued that the exploit was narrow and that it required carefully constructed prompts, and that other frontier AI models demonstrated the same behavior. But by then, it was too late. The technical debate was no longer happening inside the AI community. The findings had been reported to the US government. But that's not all. At almost the same time, another issue was beginning to attract attention. Like I said before, Project Glasswing included a carefully selected group of organizations that had been granted access to Mythos 5. One of those organizations was SK Telecom, and after concerns emerged about the company's business relationships in China, Anthropic removed it from the program. The decision happened quickly, but the questions it raised were concerning. If access to frontier AI depended on decisions made by private companies, who was responsible for deciding which organizations could be trusted with it? Over the course of just a few days, these two separate concerns had landed on the government's desk. One involved the capabilities of the model itself, and the other involved who had access to those capabilities. The discussion was no longer centered on how capable Anthropic's new models were. It had become a question of whether the company itself could safely control them. Now, to understand why Washington moved as quickly as it did, we have to go back several months. Long before Fable 5 was released, Anthropic had been working closely with the US government. The goal was to help intelligence, cybersecurity, and national defense agencies find ways that Claude can improve operations. The company believed advanced AI could strengthen national security and began deploying Claude inside classified government environments for approved applications. But the partnership had limits. CEO Dario Amodei argued that some uses of AI crossed ethical lines the company wasn't willing to support. According to Anthropic, those included mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous weapons capable of selecting and engaging targets without meaningful human control. That disagreement exposed a much larger question: who should decide how frontier AI is used? From Anthropic's perspective, those were safety decisions. The company believed the organizations building these systems had a responsibility to place limits on how they could be deployed. But inside Washington, many officials saw the situation very differently. To them, artificial intelligence is rapidly becoming part of the country's strategic infrastructure. If private companies decide which government programs they do or don't support, then they're also influencing national security policy. The disagreement became increasingly public, and the Pentagon reportedly threatened to designate Anthropic as a supply chain risk, a label that can prevent government agencies from purchasing or using a company's technology. Anthropic challenged the move in court and obtained a temporary injunction while the dispute continued. The legal battle paused the government's actions, but it didn't resolve the underlying disagreement. By the beginning of June, the relationship between Anthropic and Washington was already strained, and then Fable 5 launched, the jailbreak was discovered, and the questions about access to Mythos arose. According to Senator Mark Warner, government testing had also revealed cyber capabilities that exceeded what many officials expected from a publicly deployed AI system. From the administration's perspective, this was not simply another AI release with a technical flaw. It was a frontier model that demonstrated advanced cyber capabilities, contained safeguards that researchers had already found ways around, and was being deployed by a company that had recently challenged the government's own judgment on national security. Now, whether that assessment is fair remains open to debate, but the government had already decided that they were going to step in and take action. On June 12th, the Commerce Department issued an emergency export control order prohibiting Anthropic from providing Claude Fable 5 or Claude Mythos 5 to foreign nationals. Export controls are usually associated with physical technology like advanced computer chips, military hardware, or satellite systems. And the basic idea is simple. Some tech is considered strategically important enough that the US government restricts who can access it, particularly when foreign governments or foreign nationals are involved. But this time, the same legal framework was applied to an AI model, and it immediately created a problem. Modern AI companies don't operate inside national borders in the traditional sense. Their engineers work across multiple countries, their cloud servers connect to users around the world, and their customers include startups, universities, multinational companies, companies and governments spread across dozens of jurisdictions. Under US export law, making control technology available to a foreign national can count as an export even if that person is physically inside the United States. So the only way for Anthropic to comply with the export controls would be to separate American users from everyone else. They would literally have to verify every individual user's citizenship, something its systems had not been designed to do and something that would take a long time and be a major expense. So Anthropic chose the only response it believed it could implement immediately. It shut both models down. Fable and Mythos both disappeared, and the effects spread almost immediately. Developers who had spent the previous 3 days integrating Fable into their products suddenly lost access. Companies building software on Anthropic's API found parts of their application no longer worked. Security teams participating in Project Glasswing lost access to Mythos in the middle of ongoing evaluations. Shortly after, Anthropic released a public statement criticizing the government's decision and arguing that the reported vulnerability represented a very narrow exploit rather than a fundamental failure of the model's safety systems. The company also warned that the order could have broader consequences. If AI companies could be forced to withdraw their models because they can't instantly distinguish between domestic and international users, then every company building globally deployed AI would eventually face the same problem. But despite the pushback, the government was steadfast in their decision. Anthropic would need to update the models before they could come back. By shutting the models down, they bought time, but it didn't solve the problem. Every day Fable remained offline meant growing pressure on the company to find a way forward. The challenge wasn't simply convincing the government to reverse its decision. They had to convince regulators that the vulnerability which triggered the shutdown had been addressed. One option would have been to retrain Fable from the ground up, but that would have taken months. Instead, Anthropic focused on the system that was already responsible for deciding when requests should be redirected away from Fable. The technical term for that system is a safety classifier. Fable had launched with one already, but the Amazon jailbreak showed it could be fooled by a carefully structured prompt. So rather than rebuilding the entire model itself, Anthropic retrained the classifier using the exploit Amazon had discovered. If someone would upload a codebase and begin asking questions similar to the ones Amazon had asked, the updated classifier would recognize the pattern and redirect the request to Claude Opus 4.8 before Fable would perform the advanced vulnerability analysis. According to Anthropic, the updated classifier succeeded at blocking the reported exploit in more than 99% of internal tests. Those changes were shared with the Commerce Department, and while engineers refined the technical safeguards, government evaluators were testing them. The first breakthrough came on June 26th. The Commerce Department approved the return of Mythos 5, but only for a small group of vetted American organizations, including government agencies, cybersecurity teams, and operators of critical infrastructure. The broader public still couldn't access Fable. That only came several days later. After reviewing Anthropic's updated safeguards, the Commerce Department lifted the emergency export restrictions, and on July 1st, Fable 5 began returning. It came back to Claude.ai, Anthropic's API, and cloud platforms including Amazon Bedrock and Google Cloud. By the beginning of July, the immediate crisis was over. Claude Fable 5 was available to the public again, and Mythos 5 had returned as well, but only inside a small group of approved American organizations. On the surface, the story appeared to have ended much the way it began, but in truth, the relationship between AI companies and governments now looks noticeably different. Before the Fable 5 incident, companies developing frontier AI largely decided for themselves when a model was ready to deploy. They were the ones who performed internal safety testing, invited outside researchers to evaluate their systems, and then released the new models when they believed the risks were manageable. The June shutdown, though, introduced another participant into that process: the federal government. As part of the agreement that ended the standoff, Anthropic committed to sharing future frontier models with government evaluators before public release whenever they reached agreed national security thresholds. The company also expanded its collaboration with federal agencies on security testing, information sharing, and evaluating high-risk capabilities. Now, that doesn't mean every future AI model will require government approval before it can launch, but it does suggest that the most capable systems may no longer move from the lab to the public without much closer coordination between AI companies and Washington. For governments and businesses overseas, the shutdown exposed another issue. For nearly 3 weeks, access to one of the world's leading AI models depended on decisions made entirely by the United States government. That prompted renewed discussions in Europe, Japan, India, and elsewhere about investing in domestic AI capabilities. Countries now see the importance of reducing dependence on foreign providers and developing models that could remain available regardless of policy decisions in Washington. For years, the AI industry has focused primarily on building more capable models, but the Fable 5 crisis has highlighted a different challenge. As those models become more and more powerful, the question is no longer just about what they can do. It's now also who decides when and under what conditions they're allowed to do it.